Hi, everyone. Wow, this feels like a huge comms impromptu. But yeah, I'm glad that I had the chance to do this. Elorm, thanks for picking me. I mean, Elorm is a really popular guy. A lot of people here know him in different capacities. Some as the CBC, some as DJ E Nasty from core semester, some as a very passionate Houston Rockets fan. Sorry about your loss. The entrepreneur, the accountant, just too many things, too many titles. But at the core, Elorm is a stand-up guy. He's always there for you. I remember the first time I did meet Elorm. I think it was in E62. I had missed orientation, so I didn't really know too many people. But like Elorm was probably one of the warmest people I met. And he just like talked and it felt very familiar. So I feel like for a lot of people, Elorm feels like a familiar friend that you're reconnecting with. He has a lot of empathy. He has a lot of passion for what he likes, and he stands up and defends all his friends, and he gives people grace. There are reasons why he's like that. He's come from a very, academic family, who they do a lot of big things. He has a lot of love in his heart and his family. He has a love for Texas and Houston specifically. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Elorm Gbordzoe.
Hello, everybody. So, like Victor mentioned, my name is Elorm. For those who don't know me, I'm an MBA Sloaney, class of 23, about to graduate. And like he mentioned, I'm from Houston, Texas. Yeah, let's go. H-Town, baby. And like many people who are about to graduate, I've been looking for a full-time job recently. And so if you know anybody hiring in product or strategy in the city of New York, you got to call me. Send them my way. But as I've been going through and looking at full-time jobs, one thing that's been really top of mind is my resume. More specifically, how to explain a gap in my resume to my employers, future employers. Now, I'm not talking about the 2-year gap that we're all experiencing right now, where we're, as Oge likes to call it, cosplaying as students while we travel the world, pursue our goals and our dreams, and hope to pivot away from the jobs we had before or potentially go back to the jobs we had. I'm talking about me specifically about a career gap that I had that happened between February and June of 2018. Now, it's kind of hard to describe what this gap is and put it on my resume. I could say that I was a full-time contractor, first-time contractor, or I could say that I was a semi-pro hockey player, but I'm from Texas and we don't have ice down there, so I don't think anyone would really believe me. But before I hop into what this gap really was, I first would like to talk about my parents. So for those of you that didn't know this, I'm a first-generation American, and that's because both of my parents are from Ghana. This is a Western nation in Africa, sits on the Atlantic coast, and they're specifically from the Volta region of Ghana, which is in the northern region. And up there, they really value education. And through no surprise, both of my parents used education to get to the United States. So my mom, she used education. She went and studied in London. She studied mobility and transportation before ending up in New York City. And my mom is one of the most loving, caring, kind people, and most importantly, patient people in the world. And good Lord, does she have to be patient, because I have 2 brothers, and we were crazy as hell growing up. And I remember specifically my mom preaching patience in a specific incident where I was ready to fight my little brother. And she told me that, Elorm, it takes 2 people to fight. And if you choose not to fight, they hold no power over you. And to this day, that has helped shape who I am as a person. It's something I draw upon whenever I'm in a confrontational situation. And I know I'm a big dude and I could probably beat up a lot of people, but I choose not to, because of my mom. Now, there's my dad, who growing up is just to explain, he is one of the most smart people I've ever met in my life. And I've met all of y'all. And like, I say that because he has a photographic memory. He actually remembers everything since he was 1 year old. And he told me, and growing up, and he also used education to get out of Ghana by going by way of the University of Western Ontario. Now, fun fact, he did have an offer at MIT, but he chose to turn that down because he went to Ontario and saw the cowboy culture, the hockey culture, and the snow for the first time and said, sign my ass up. And so he pursued chemical engineering and pursued his PhD for like 12 years before finally moving to New York City to be with my mom. And growing up, if you know anything about immigrant parents or African parents, he was super strict, good Lord. And like I said, he had to be because we were crazy as hell. Specifically, I remember when me and my older brother saw a food fight on TV for the first time, and we were like, that would be so cool to do in real life. So we did. The next day, we went to daycare and we kicked off a food fight, and we all got kicked, and both of us got kicked out of daycare. So my dad, rightfully so, was super strict. He's a big softie now, so it's all good. But my dad, when he moved to New York, my mom and dad got married, and then they had my older brother, Della, myself, before finally moving down to Houston, had my little brother, Senna, and they realized they needed to find a home. And they found a home in this brand new neighborhood called Georgetown Colony, where they found this beautiful 2-story orange brick house with 2 giant pine trees in the front, rooms for all of us, although me and my brothers had to share 1 bathroom. You can imagine what the hell that was like. And then also a big backyard where we could run around and play. And it was in that house that I learned to be a man. It's where I learned the importance of education. And most importantly, it's where I learned to be an older and younger brother, being a middle child. But growing up, I always had this itch to leave Houston. I told everybody that would hear me talk, and y'all know I talk a lot, that I was going to move to New York City one day. But by my mid-20s, I was still stuck in Houston. I'd done my education at Texas A&M, got my, that's right, let's go. I did my undergrad and master's there as an accountant, and then I became a licensed CPA. But my first job out of school, I was promised that if I stay at this job for 1 year, you'll get to go to New York City the next year if you do well. And I did well, and that didn't matter to them. And they said that you can just wait till next year. And so, unlike my mom, I was super impatient and I quit. And I went and found another job that promised a similar thing in Houston. The next year went by, and lo and behold, I was lied to again, and I quit again. But this time I went back to the first job I went to. So, and at this point, by May of 2017, I went on a trip to Europe, and I came back and I decided, you know what, screw it. I'm going to move to New York. And I had always thought it'd be so hard, and it turns out it actually wasn't that hard at all. And luckily for me, I got hired at a job at jet.com and was slated to move to New York. And I was super excited. And by the end of May, I did one little thing that, just to see what was going on in New York. I changed my Hinge profile location from Houston to New York City. And luckily for me, what was out there was this beautiful woman by the name of Hannah Porterfield. Yeah. Now, Hannah had, just like me, had been traveling all over the place, and her schedule was really jam-packed. So she didn't mind having to just chat for a little bit while we planned out our first date. Now, unknowingly to her, I didn't mention that I was still living in Houston and was on the way to moving to New York, but neither here nor there at this point. But when we were talking, what was I even going with this? Sorry. So, but things were going great. And in June of 2017, I coincidentally was on a work trip, just about to put in my 2 weeks notice. And I got to go to New York City and had our first date in FiDi. And the date went amazingly well. But that Hannah and Elorm story is a story for another day. So by July of 2017, I got to move to New York City. I was finally did it. I was living in Chelsea, and I was living the New York dream. I got to ride the subway and see all the things I had seen in books. I got to eat all the foods on Instagram. And like many New Yorkers, I learned to hate Times Square. Good Lord, that place sucks. And New York was sick. That was until late August, early September of 2017. So around that time, there was a hurricane slated to hit the city of Houston. And personally, I wasn't concerned at all. Growing up, there had been hurricanes that had hit Houston, had hit neighboring New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina. And honestly, our house had never flooded. On top of that, my older brother, Della, was here actually at Sloan getting his MBA. So he wasn't really concerned. My little brother was living in the city of Houston, but he was living in the city center, which had never flooded and wasn't really concerning. And my parents, coincidentally, were in Ghana visiting family. But unfortunately, this hurricane was different. The hurricane was named Harvey, and its wind speed, it was a Category 4 hurricane, which meant its wind speeds were up to 135 miles per hour. And over the 4 days that Hurricane Harvey sat over the city of Houston, it dumped 61.5 inches of rain on the entire city. It was slow moving, which was very different. Most hurricanes come in a day and go. And the rainwater that accumulated in the city started to overwhelm all of the water systems, specifically 2 reservoirs. One reservoir, which is the Bear Creek Reservoir, was on the brink of completely flooding and overspilling. And the city of Houston had to make a decision. Either flood a small number of the wealthiest homes in the city of Houston, or do a controlled release of the water and flood all of the homes that were middle class and lower class homes, and I'm putting lower class, middle class in quotes, because come on now, that were behind the reservoir. And unfortunately, the city of Houston chose to do the latter. Now, Hurricane Harvey's, which meant they were going to release the water on the homes directly behind the reservoir. And unfortunately, the home that I grew up in was also behind that reservoir. Now, Hurricane Harvey flooded more than 204,000 homes in the city of Houston. And of those homes, 80% of those didn't have flood insurance. And what that meant is that if your home flooded, any damage that was done due to the water or the flood damage was on you to pay out of pocket. And so it takes me to September 1st, 2017. I'm sitting there at work, chilling, looking at the New York skyline, because it turns out I was working in Hoboken. And I get a phone call. I get a phone call from my little brother. And my little brother was in tears. And this was a sound I hadn't heard since I was a little kid. The last time I had heard my little brother cry like this was when I was kicking his ass at Super Smash Brothers, and he couldn't do anything to stop me. But this time was completely different. And he had told me that he had arrived to our house by boat. And a rush of questions went through my head. First off, are you okay? What the hell do you mean by boat? Is our house okay? And like, are we victims? Like, what does this mean? And so he proceeded to tell me that when he got to our house, he saw that our house, and this was after a little bit of the water had receded, he had got to our house and it was completely flooded with 4 feet of water in the house. And 4 feet's about right here. And not only that, but in the rush to save some of the stuff in our house before the floodwaters had actually arrived to our home, he was only able to move one of my parents' cars out of the way before the floodwaters could get there. And so when he arrived, 2 of the cars were also underwater as well. And he was completely broken, and he sent me a picture, and you look out, he's sitting on top of a truck, and it's just a river of water. And everything after that call was a blur. I remember trying to instinctively be big brother, but I did what I could to console him, and I hung up the phone. And then the next thing I did is I called Hannah, and I broke down in tears. And then after that, I just booked a plane ticket home to Houston to see what I could do to help. When I arrived in Houston in mid-September 2017, the thing I remember most about this entire trip was just the pain. The pain of having to take a sledgehammer to the walls of our house, the home that I grew up in, to the island, to the cabinets, to everything, because if we didn't remove that stuff and air out the walls, there would be mold in the entire house and it would destroy the entire house. I remember the pain of having to grab my childhood photos and the childhood photos of my brothers and of us as a family and the pictures of my parents when they were younger and put them on the lawn in hopes that they would dry and not be completely ruined. But the pain I remember most was the pain of my parents having to sit there and watch this happen to them. Watch strangers and volunteers come into the house and rip apart the house and take away essentially the American dream that they had hoped to build. But there was really nothing I could do outside of that. And so fortunately for my dad, his company actually put him and my mom into an apartment complex for the next 3 months and actually paid for it. And I just went back home to New York, but I left wishing I could do more. And the next couple of months were a blur. The only thing I remember, and I know this is gonna be controversial, is the Houston Astros winning the World Series. And I only remember that because they were wearing these patches on their jerseys that said Houston Strong for all the victims of Hurricane Harvey. I remember J.J. Watt raising $100 million, and that was really it. And before you knew it, it was Christmas time, and I had to go back home to Houston once again. Now, to tell you about Christmas time in my house, it is an amazing time. It's fun. You can ask Hannah. It's a good time. My family, when I wake up on Christmas, we run downstairs, turn on the TV, turn on the NBA, which is on all day, which is amazing. And we sit there and argue. Me and my brothers will argue about the most random stuff. My mom will be singing off key, like terribly, to Christmas music. And then my dad will be preparing a turkey. And at some point when the games are on break, we sit down and have a nice meal and actually enjoy each other's company. But that Christmas, all there was silence. You see, at this point, my parents had the opportunity to move back into the house, but the entire first floor was unlivable. There was no furniture. There were no appliances. There was no pictures on the wall. There's nothing except a mini fridge and a microwave to microwave our meals. And I remember, bless you, I remember just sitting in my room on Christmas Day, didn't run down the stairs. Everyone was just to themselves silent, trying to cope with the trauma and the tragedy that had happened to us. And I left that Christmas break wishing I could do more again. And this time, I gave my parents all the money I had in my bank account, my savings account, because we're not wealthy people by any means. And so I go back home in January to New York, and that month was totally miserable. And so in February of 2018, Hannah invited me to a hockey match to go see Michigan State versus Minnesota at Madison Square Garden. And while I'm there, I see a guy sifting through the crowd looking for something, and I ask him, hey, what's up? Because I love talking to people. And he tells me that he's looking for a person who's a Michigan State fan and who has insurance to go down to center ice for a chance to win a car. And I'm like, well, I'm not a Michigan State fan. I'm wearing the shirt, but Hannah is, and she has insurance, so pick my girlfriend. Well, it turns out that when they said insurance, they meant car insurance because this was sponsored by a car insurance company. But it's New York City. Nobody has a car. But in the chaos of all of Hurricane Harvey, my parents forgot to remove me from their car insurance. So I was like, all right, well, if she can't go, I'll go do it. So as I'm walking down to the ice to go shoot for a chance to win this car, I get advice from this one guy who tells me, because I never played hockey in my life, he says, don't slap shot the puck when you're out there, just push it. And so the first shot was an empty net from a quarter ice. I think it's a red line. I don't know. He tells me, so I'm out there and it's empty net for a chance to win this t-shirt pack. And I go out there and I push the hockey puck and it's way too far to the left and way too long. And at this point, they walk me back to center ice and I have 2 shots for a chance to win this car. So to win the car, you have to put the hockey puck, which is about this big, into a hole about this big from center ice. Impossible. The first shot I take, I push it again, but this time I went a little too far to the right and it goes right and way too short. The third one, I hit it and I pushed it a little bit harder. And the second I hit it, I looked at that and I was like, holy shit, that's going in. And you know what? It did. It was nuts. The next thing I remember was yeah. The next thing I remember was I went and I hugged the mascot of Michigan State. I did not go to the school. I was dancing on the ice and high-fiving people. I hugged the guy who gave me that advice, and I went back down to my seat with Hannah, and they put us on the Jumbotron, and honestly, that should have been one of the happiest days of my life. But this isn't a hockey story. And so the next day, I woke up wishing I could do more for my family. Embarrassingly, Drake released God's Plan, and I was like, I took that as a sign to be like, you need to go and help your parents. And so that day, I told Hannah I was moving back to Houston, and I quit my job and got out of my New York apartment. I don't know how I did that last part, but I ended up back in Houston by the end of February 2018. And when I got home, I realized the thing my parents needed the most was time to repair the house. You see, like I said, we're not the house. And because they couldn't take off time to fix the house, they didn't have time to manage contractors, which meant that the house wouldn't get repaired, but they needed to work in order to actually be able to afford the repairs to the house. It was a broken cycle. And so I offered my contracting services. Now, growing up, I was not handy at all. I couldn't hammer a nail, couldn't screw in a screw, couldn't do any of that stuff. But I remember actually specifically, I went and mowed the lawn one time and my dad was gonna pay me like $10 and he refused to pay me because there were a bunch of crooked lines all through the grass. But I was the best that my parents had, so they kind of stuck with me. And so between February and June of 2018, I remember I used a little bit of my charm that I allegedly have to try to sweet talk people and finesse my way into getting lower prices for my family. Because my parents had a budget about $20,000, and during that time of Hurricane Harvey, people were price gouging and ripping people off, and the job would have cost at that time around like $50,000, maybe $40,000, somewhere around there. I had a friend who happened to be doing contracting work. I don't know if he was ripping people off, but he had a contractor's number that I was able to use. And during that time frame, I was able to actually go and use this power of talking to people to finesse my way into helping people believe that I had this big business going on. And I was able to actually get my parents marble and cabinets and all this other stuff at wholesale prices. I was able to stay on top of contractors who were doing appliances and installations and all these other things. And somehow, some way, by the end of May of 2018, the house was, while it looked different, was at least functional again. And I remember the happiest moment of that entire time period was when my parents came home from work one day and they sat back down on those couches in the living room. They turned on the news and it was like everything was back to normal. But that time period took a toll on me. I mean, not only did I have to give up the dream of living in New York City, bless you. Not only did I have to give up the dream of living in New York City, I had to give up getting to know Hannah, a woman that I loved in person. I gained like 50 pounds because the depression and the hell of going through all that was pretty hard on me personally. But I'm working on losing all that weight, so it'll be off here soon enough. But lastly, it left a giant hole in my resume. But hey, you know what? Holes in my resume or holes in anyone's resume shouldn't define who they are as a person. Because in reality in life, there's really two resumes. There's that one resume, it's an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper that defines all your work experiences and talks about all the accomplishments that you've had, the schools you went to, and all those other things. But there's a second and more important invisible resume that really weaves the tapestry of who you are as a person in your life and how you ended up to where you are today. And so as we go into the world and get our jobs as future leaders and decision makers, as we're looking for that next big banker, product manager, founder, whatever, and you're sifting through those resumes, please try to remember that behind each one of those resumes, there's a person with a story to tell. And so with that, I'd like to leave you guys with one piece of information or one piece of advice that really helped me through that really difficult time in my life from February to, or in 2018, 2017. If you ever find yourself standing on center ice at a hockey match for a chance to win a car or a prize or anything, don't slap shot the puck, push it. Thank you very much.